There's a version of you that only comes out under pressure. You've seen it. Maybe in an argument that went further than it should have. Maybe in a decision you can't fully explain, even to yourself, one that felt so obviously right in the moment and so strange in hindsight. For years you've probably told yourself a comforting story, that you're a rational person, that you know your own mind, that you're not like those people who get controlled by their emotions, their envy, their need for attention. Here's the uncomfortable part. Almost everyone tells themselves that same story. The narcissist who dominates every dinner conversation thinks he's just passionate. The person quietly sabotaging their own career thinks they are just unlucky. The friend who turned on you overnight thinks she was simply seeing clearly for the first time. Nobody wakes up and decides to be irrational, envious, or self-destructive. It happens underneath conscious awareness, in the machinery Robert Greene spent years studying, and it happens to all of us, without exception. Robert Greene spent years studying history's most perceptive minds, from ancient generals to modern psychologists, and what he found is that almost nobody is who they think they are. Not you, not me, not the calm coworker down the hall, not the confident stranger you envy from across the room. Underneath the surface, we're all running on the same 18 hidden operating systems, installed in childhood, mostly invisible, quietly steering everything we do. Ignore them, and they run you from the shadows. Understand them, and you get something most people never earn: the ability to read a room before it turns on you, to catch manipulation before it lands, and to finally understand your own behavior instead of being baffled by it over and over again. That's what we're breaking down today. 18 Laws of Human Nature, pulled from Robert Greene's mind-bending book of the same name. Stick around, because Law 9 alone will change how you see every nice person in your life, and Law 18 might just change how you see your own. And if you want the condensed action guide that turns these 18 laws into a daily practice you can actually use, I've built a free blueprint for you, the link's waiting in the description. Let's get into it. We'll move through this in 3 parts. First, mastering yourself, the battles happening inside your own head, mostly without your permission. Second, navigating the people around you, the games everyone's playing whether they admit it or not, including you. And third, the long view, the laws that quietly determine whether your life adds up to something, or just drifts by while you're busy reacting to whatever's in front of you. Law 1 is the law of irrationality. You like to think you're driving your own decisions, weighing the evidence, choosing the logical path. You're not, and neither is anyone else. Your brain isn't one clean system, it's 3 systems stacked on top of each other, built layer by layer over millions of years of survival. At the bottom sits the reptilian brain, pure instinct, the thing that yanks your hand off a hot stove before pain even registers. Stacked on top of that is your emotional brain, coloring every memory and every choice with feeling before you're even conscious of making one. Only after that does your rational brain switch on, and it's slow. Painfully slow compared to the other 2. Most of the time, its real job isn't deciding anything. It's writing a tidy justification for a decision your emotions already made milliseconds earlier. Ancient Athens learned this the hard way. When war fever swept the city and 10,000 citizens screamed for an immediate attack on Sparta, one aging statesman named Pericles held the floor with nothing but cold, careful reasoning, no theatrics, no crowd-pleasing, and it steadied a city on the edge of a catastrophic mistake. The lesson isn't that you can delete emotion from the equation. You can't, and you shouldn't want to. The lesson is that you can build a pause between the spark and the reaction. Next time you feel a surge building, name it. Is it fear? Anger? Wounded pride? Just naming the emotion weakens its grip on you. Then trace it back to where it actually started. That flash of anger at your partner might really be stress from a meeting 3 hours earlier that has nothing to do with them. And then, simply, wait. Count to 10. Breathe. That gap between stimulus and response is the closest thing to free will you will ever get, and almost nobody uses it. Think about the last major purchase you made: a phone, a car, even just a coffee order you talked yourself into. You probably believe you weighed the options carefully. But your emotional brain reacts in milliseconds, while your rational brain needs whole seconds just to get started, and by the time it shows up, the decision's already made. Marketers figured this out decades ago. They rarely sell you features. They sell you identity, belonging, status, an emotional hit dressed up in a 30-second ad, because they know exactly which part of your brain is actually holding the wallet. Law 2 is the law of narcissism. Here's an uncomfortable truth to sit with: we are all narcissists, every single one of us, without exception. The only real question is where you land on the spectrum. From the moment you were born, you needed attention just to feel real. It's not vanity, it's survival. Human infants who don't get eye contact and attention literally fail to thrive. But there's never enough attention to go around, so somewhere between ages 2 and 5, your brain built you a private fallback, a self-image you could retreat to and quietly admire even when the world wasn't looking. That inner reserve is healthy narcissism, and it's the entire foundation of self-esteem. But some people never got to build that foundation properly. Maybe their parents were too absorbed in themselves to notice the child forming in front of them. Maybe the opposite happened, and they were smothered so completely by an over-involved parent that they never got the room to build a self of their own. Either way, they're left with a bottomless hole where a stable identity should be, and they need you, constantly, to fill it. That's the deep narcissist. Confident on the surface, fragile underneath, allergic to any criticism, forever steering the conversation back toward themselves with a well-timed story. You've met one. If you're honest, you've been one, on a bad day. The fix isn't self-hatred, and it isn't performing humility either. It's redirection, deliberately, consciously turning your attention outward. Get genuinely curious about the people in front of you instead of waiting for your turn to talk. You'll notice something strange happen almost immediately. The less you chase attention, the more of it naturally comes to you. It helps to have a gauge, too. Over your next few conversations, just count. How often do you steer the topic back to yourself, check your phone while someone else is mid-sentence, or feel that flash of impatience the second attention shifts away from you? Most people are shocked by what that simple count reveals. Law 3 is the law of role-playing. Every single person you meet is performing for you in some way, and you are performing right back at them. That's not cynicism, that's just how social life functions. The polished resume that quietly omits the failed year, the curated photo that never shows the argument 5 minutes before it was taken, the version of yourself you bring to a job interview versus the one that shows up at the bar with old friends afterward. A 17-year-old named Milton Erickson discovered how deep this goes almost by accident. Paralyzed in bed with polio, unable to move or speak, he had nothing to do but watch his family talk to each other. With every other channel shut off, he started noticing the second language running underneath their words, the 16 distinct ways a casual yes could actually mean absolutely not, the tension in an arm that gave away a lie the smiling face was covering. He went on to become one of the most perceptive therapists of the 20th century, and it started because illness forced him to actually watch people instead of just half listening to them the way the rest of us do. You have that same capacity sitting dormant. Start by learning someone's baseline, how they normally talk, sit, gesture, so you actually notice the moment they drift from it. Watch for the gap between what someone's mouth is saying and what their body is doing, because when those two things disagree, the body is almost always telling the truth. And remember the flip side of this law: since you're being read to, the smartest move isn't inventing a fake new personality. It's presenting the truest, most intentional version of the one you've already got, with your tone, your posture, and your words all pointing in the same direction. Studies suggest something like 90% of emotional meaning gets carried by tone and body language, not the words themselves. So when the two disagree, people feel it instantly, even if they can't name what's off. A little genuine openness goes a long way here too. Share something real instead of something rehearsed, and people trust you faster than any polished performance could ever manage. Law 4 is the law of compulsive behavior. Who you are was largely locked in by the time you left adolescence, and the patterns installed back then keep replaying on a loop you rarely notice you're stuck in. The executive who can never enjoy a single win, no matter how big, trace it back far enough and you'll usually find a childhood where love came with a price tag attached to achievement. The woman who keeps ending up with partners who mistreat her isn't making the same mistake by accident. She's often unconsciously recreating the emotional temperature of her earliest relationships, because familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar peace. These aren't just bad habits you can white-knuckle your way out of. They are compulsions, and Greene's blunt point is that dramatic personal transformation is rare. Your core character tends to stay remarkably stable across a lifetime. So stop listening to what people tell you about themselves and start watching what they actually do under small amounts of pressure. How someone reacts to a minor mistake, how they treat a waiter, how they behave the one time they think no one important is watching, that tells you more in 30 seconds than a year of polite conversation ever will. And it applies to you too. The parts of your life that keep repeating, no matter how many times you swear this time will be different, are your patterns talking. You can't erase them. But naming them, clearly and specifically, is the first real step toward loosening their grip. Ask yourself what you do the moment a small plan falls apart, or what you reach for the instant you're handed a little bit of power over someone else. Those two answers tell you more about your actual character than any personality quiz ever will. Law 5 is the Law of Covetousness. Want proof that you're less rational than you think? Researchers once filled two identical jars with the exact same cookies, one jar nearly full, one nearly empty, and asked people which cookies tasted better. They picked the nearly empty jar, almost every time. Same cookies. The only variable was scarcity, and scarcity alone was enough to rewire people's taste buds. Desire isn't triggered by quality nearly as often as we assume, it's triggered by three specific forces: the forbidden, the mysterious, and the socially validated. That's why a restaurant with a line out the door feels automatically better than the empty one next to it, even when you know nothing about either kitchen. It's why the person who reveals a little less of themselves seems more magnetic than the person who overshares on a first date. Once you understand this mechanism, you can use it deliberately, become slightly less available, slightly more selective about what you reveal, and watch how quickly people's interest sharpens. And you can also diffuse it in yourself. Next time you feel that hot, sudden pull towards something purely because everyone else seems to want it, stop and ask one honest question: would I still want this if nobody else did? 9 times out of 10, the honest answer deflates the desire on the spot. Law 6 is the Law of Shortsightedness. Picture two chess players. One reacts to whatever move is directly in front of him, one turn at a time, hoping for the best, and within a few exchanges is trapped in checkmate without ever seeing it coming. The other sees the entire board 10 moves ahead and quietly controls the flow of the whole game. Most of us live like the first player, and Greene lays out exactly why. There's the trap of unintended consequences, the crash diet that costs you a knee injury, which stops the workouts, which brings the weight back plus 10 extra pounds of interest. There's tactical hell, winning every single argument with your boss, feeling triumphant every time, right up until promotion season, when the quieter colleague who never picked a fight gets the job instead. There's reacting to every headline like it's a 5-alarm emergency, dumping your savings into a stock because of one news alert. And there's the opposite failure, drowning in tiny details, obsessing over the perfect font for your website while your competitors have already launched and captured the market. The way out is one simple filter, applied before almost any real decision. Will this actually matter in 5 years? That single question, asked honestly, will save you from most of the mistakes that feel urgent today and embarrassing in hindsight. It also helps to ask a second one right alongside it. Does this actual decision move me closer to what I want long-term, or is it just the loudest thing demanding my attention this hour? Urgent and important are rarely the same thing, no matter how convincingly they dress alike. Before we go further, quick favor: if any of this is landing, hit like now so it doesn't disappear into the algorithm, and subscribe if you want the rest of Greene's laws broken down the same way. It genuinely helps this channel keep making free deep dives like this one. Okay, back to it. 3 laws left in part 1, and they might be the heaviest. Law 7 is the Law of Defensiveness. Think about the last time someone criticized you, even gently. That tightening in your chest wasn't optional, it's hardwired. Your brain treats an attack on your ego almost exactly like a physical threat, because your entire identity rests on 3 beliefs it will defend at any cost: that you're in control of your own decisions, that you're intelligent, and that you're fundamentally a good, decent person. Challenge any one of those, even accidentally, and the walls slam shut instantly. That's exactly why blunt confrontation almost never changes anyone's mind. You're not making an argument, you're threatening someone's identity, and identities don't surrender to logic. The people who actually move others do the opposite of arguing. They listen far more than they speak, letting the other person fully unload before offering a single opinion of their own. They let calm spread rather than matching aggression with aggression, because emotional states are contagious whether you want them to be or not. And most importantly, they don't attack the other person's self-image, they validate it. Someone who prizes their independence will resist your idea purely on principle, but frame the same idea as their own free choice, and their resistance often evaporates on its own. Every single time you catch yourself getting defensive, that's a real opportunity to grow, quietly locking itself shut in real time. And if you're the one trying to persuade, there's one more move worth knowing. When someone digs in stubbornly, pulling back often works better than pushing harder. Say something like, "This might not be for you," and their own contrarian streak sometimes does the persuading for you. Law 8 is the law of self-sabotage. Anton Chekhov grew up being beaten regularly by a father who insisted he was doing it out of love, working through freezing Russian winters in a grocery store instead of playing outside like other children, the kind of childhood that manufactures bitterness for life, and would have justified it completely. He had every reason to become hostile and hopeless. Instead, somewhere in that mess, he built the opposite, an attitude of curiosity and dark, forgiving humor toward the very people who'd hurt him, and that attitude is part of what made him one of the greatest writers who ever lived. Your attitude isn't a passive reaction to your circumstances, the way most people assume. It's an active filter that creates the very circumstances you then react to. Walk into a room convinced no one will like you, and you'll act guarded, quiet, and closed off, and the people in that room will pick up on it and keep their distance, proving your original belief correct without you ever noticing the trap you built yourself. Walk into the exact same room believing you'll connect with someone, and you'll act open and warm, and you'll get an entirely different result from the same event. This isn't a call for forced positivity or denial. It's about recognizing that your outlook is a lever you're already pulling on constantly, whether you notice it or not, so you might as well grab it on purpose. And the shift rarely needs to be dramatic. Small, consistent changes in your actual behavior, repeated over weeks, quietly retrain what you expect from the world, and what the world, in turn, starts giving back to you. Law 9 is the law of repression, and this might be the single most important law on this entire list. Every person you know is hiding a shadow, the impulses, the anger, the desires they've quietly decided are too dangerous or too shameful to ever show the world. Richard Nixon spent his entire political career rebuilding himself after one humiliating defeat after another, working harder than almost anyone in American politics to prove to the world that he was a principled idealist and not the ruthless operator his enemies always described. And it was precisely the shadow he refused to face, the paranoia, the obsessive need for control, the willingness to do absolutely anything to win, that eventually destroyed the presidency he'd fought his whole life to build. That's the exact pattern to watch for in the people around you. The loudest moral crusader is very often battling the exact urge in himself that he condemns so publicly in everyone else. The person who explodes over something genuinely tiny is detonating years of buried pressure, not reacting to the small thing actually sitting in front of them. And denying your own shadow doesn't make it disappear, it just forces it out sideways, through addiction, through relationships you can't explain why you keep sabotaging, through an illness that has no obvious physical cause. The people who seem the most fully, solidly alive aren't the ones without a dark side at all. They're the ones who finally stopped pretending they don't have one, and learned to channel it instead of hiding from it. That starts with a simple habit. The next time you feel unexpectedly triggered, judgmental, or defensive about something small, don't rush past it. Ask what that reaction is actually protecting, and what it might need instead of shame. Usually the need underneath is completely legitimate. It's just been expressing itself in the only unhealthy way it was ever allowed to. That closes out part 1, mastering the battles inside your own head. It's the hardest part, honestly, because it requires turning your attention toward exactly the things you'd rather not look at. But it's also the part that pays off fastest, because unlike other people, you actually have direct access to your own machinery. Now let's step outside yourself, into the games being played all around you, every single day, whether you've noticed or not. Law 10 is the law of envy. That flicker of irritation when a friend's good news lands, right before you catch yourself and feel a little guilty about it, that's envy, and pretending you never feel it is exactly what makes it dangerous. It shows up in two very different forms. Passive envy is the quiet one, the friend who slowly stops including you in plans, the colleague who mysteriously forgets to loop you into an important email chain. Active envy is louder and sharper, the public jab disguised as a joke, the whisper campaign that quietly questions how you really got where you are. It gets triggered hardest by rapid success, by public visibility, and above all by proximity. A stranger's success barely registers, but the exact same success from someone standing right next to you cuts deep. The solution isn't to hide your wins or shrink yourself to make others comfortable. It's learning to redirect the feeling the moment you catch it aimed at yourself, back toward your own path instead of anyone else's, because the only comparison that actually means anything is the one between who you are right now and who you were a year ago. Master your own craft deeply enough, and envy of other people's craft starts to feel almost beside the point. Law 11 is the law of grandiosity. You've watched someone change after landing a big win, a little more arrogant, a little less interested in feedback, gradually convinced they are simply built differently from everyone around them. That's grandiosity, and it almost always starts out as perfectly healthy confidence before it slowly curdles into something dangerous. The warning signs are specific and worth memorizing. Crediting every success purely to your own genius while quietly erasing luck and everyone who helped you along the way. Surrounding yourself only with people who flatter you and cutting off anyone who pushes back. Treating every small win as fresh proof of some grand personal destiny. Left unchecked, it ends in reckless decisions made by someone who has genuinely stopped believing consequences apply to them personally. But the fix isn't shrinking your ambition down to nothing. Greene actually calls the alternative practical grandiosity. Keep the big dream fully alive, but keep at least one or two people close who are allowed to tell you an uncomfortable truth. Commit to a single real, achievable goal instead of chasing every fantasy of greatness simultaneously. Ambition is genuinely useful fuel. Just make sure somebody besides you is still allowed to check the gauge. Push yourself right up to the edge of your ability without going reckless, and treat every bold move as a controlled experiment rather than a proof of destiny. That's the difference between ambition that builds something and ambition that eventually burns the whole thing down. Law 12 is the law of gender rigidity. From early childhood, you were quietly trained to perform only one half of who you actually are. Boys pushed hard toward toughness and independence, girls pushed hard toward accommodation and empathy, and the half you were told to bury never actually vanished. It just went looking for an outlet somewhere else, usually in the people you find yourself irresistibly drawn to. If you were taught early on to suppress your own assertiveness, don't be surprised if you keep ending up with domineering partners who supply exactly what you were never allowed to develop for yourself. The traits that irritate you most in other people are frequently the same traits you've buried deep in yourself, and part of what irritates you is watching them enjoy something you never gave yourself permission to access. The way out is integration, not more repression in the opposite direction. If you're naturally too guarded, deliberately practice expressing what you actually feel out loud. If you're naturally too passive, practice setting one specific boundary you've been quietly avoiding for months. Wholeness was never about picking a side of yourself to live on permanently. It's about being flexible enough to reach whichever half a given moment genuinely requires. A logical person doesn't need to abandon logic to grow, they just need to add empathy alongside it. A nurturing person doesn't need to stop caring, they just need to add the ability to say no. Real strength was never one trait maxed out. It's the full range, available on demand. Law 13 is the law of aimlessness. Picture two classmates, 10 years removed from graduation. One has chased every high-paying job and every passing trend the market rewarded, and still wakes up most mornings with the nagging sense that something important is missing. The other picked one real problem worth solving and kept working at it through every setback along the way, and somehow feels more solid with each year that passes, even the difficult ones. The difference between them was never raw talent. It was purpose. And here's the trap almost everyone falls into: we keep hunting for that purpose in exactly the wrong places. Pleasure fades embarrassingly fast. Researchers tracking lottery winners found they returned to their original baseline of happiness within a matter of months. Money doesn't fill the hole either. History is packed with people who hit every single financial target they ever set for themselves and still quietly asked, "Is this genuinely all there is?" Fame is worse than both, offering a hit of validation that has to be constantly refed because it never once actually satisfies the hunger underneath it. Real direction tends to come from somewhere quieter than any of that. Look back across your own life for the specific moments when time simply disappeared, when you were locked so completely into what you were doing that you forgot to check the clock even once. That's not a coincidence you can safely ignore. That's a clue you've probably been sitting on for years. Break whatever you find down into something small enough to act on this week, then this month, then this year. Purpose rarely arrives fully formed, it gets built one deliberate layer at a time, the way a sculptor works a single block of marble down into something recognizable. Law 14 is the law of conformity. You believe, genuinely, that you're an independent thinker. Every group you've ever belonged to would like you to know otherwise. The moment you step into a group, an unconscious social self quietly takes over and starts mirroring opinions you don't actually hold, purely to avoid the mild discomfort of standing out from everyone else. It's exactly how emotions spread through a crowd like a virus jumping from person to person, and how perfectly ordinary, decent people end up participating in things alone they'd never have seriously considered, because certainty itself is contagious, and the moment everyone around you seems completely sure of something, your own private doubt quietly switches itself off without your permission. This is precisely how financial bubbles inflate past all reason, and how genuinely intelligent people end up trapped inside cults. Protecting yourself from this doesn't mean rejecting every group you're part of. It means anchoring yourself to something more solid than whatever mood the room happens to be in that day. Have a clear personal purpose that isn't simply belonging for its own sake. Choose the handful of people in your inner circle deliberately instead of by pure accident of proximity. And treat any group where nobody is ever allowed to openly disagree as a genuine warning sign, not as proof of real unity. The healthiest groups actually encourage a little friction, because disagreement, handled well, sharpens the truth instead of threatening it. Law 15 is the law of fickleness. You've had a friendship that felt permanent, unbreakable, right up until one rumor reached them, and suddenly they'd made up their mind about you completely without ever once asking for your side of it. That reaction was never really about you specifically. People's opinions of others are far less stable than we like to assume, because they rest on two shaky foundations simultaneously: internal moods that shift for private reasons that have nothing at all to do with you, and external cultural pressure that constantly craves novelty and gets bored embarrassingly fast. If you're building anything at all that depends on how people see you, a career, a following, a hard-won reputation, chasing every mood swing in real time will exhaust you long before it ever satisfies you. The people who managed to hold public trust the longest were never the flashiest personalities in the room. They were consistently, almost boringly, the same person day after day. They stay calm precisely when everyone else around them starts to panic, because someone in the room has to become the anchor, and a crowd will always gravitate toward whoever refuses to move. A little unpredictability helps too. Total consistency can tip into boring, and boring is easy to stop paying attention to. The trick is staying steady in your values while staying just interesting enough that people keep watching. That's part 2 fully done. Now, the long view, 3 final laws that quietly decide whether your whole life adds up to something real, or just politely passes you by while you're distracted with the small stuff. These last 3 hit differently than the first 15, because they're less about any single interaction and more about the shape of an entire life looked at from a distance. And a quick reminder before we head into the final stretch: if you're getting real value out of this breakdown, drop a comment with which one of these 18 laws hit closest to home for you. I read every single one, and it genuinely shapes which books we cover here next. Law 16 is the law of aggression. Underneath the polite exterior of almost everyone you know is a current of real aggression that civilization taught them how to hide, not how to actually eliminate. Some people turn that current inward, and it resurfaces as anxiety or quiet, chronic self-doubt they can never fully explain. Some let it leak out sideways as passive aggression, the colleague who's always somehow running late, quietly announcing that their time matters more than yours, the compliment with a small blade folded neatly inside it, the person who is simply never satisfied no matter what you do for them, ever. And some channel that same current forward, into genuine ambition, into real drive, into the fuel behind essentially every serious achievement you've ever privately admired in someone else. That's the actual choice on offer here, and it's the same one for everyone. You cannot erase this force in yourself no matter how hard you try, and pretending you don't have it just guarantees it comes out sideways in some form you didn't choose. The people who handle it best were never the ones who suppressed it completely. They're the ones who notice it early, without shame or judgment, and consciously redirect it towards something they're actually building. The goal was never to become passive. It's to become assertive instead of aggressive, stating what you need plainly, holding a boundary firmly, without ever needing to dominate the room to feel secure in it. Law 17 is the law of generational myopia. You quietly assume your values are simply, obviously correct. In reality, they're mostly just the water you happen to grow up swimming in, invisible to you precisely because you've never known anything else. A generation shaped by economic collapse becomes obsessed with financial security for the rest of its collective life. A generation shaped by a long boom becomes convinced that growth is basically permanent and unstoppable. Historians have actually tracked this recurring pattern across entire centuries. One generation of revolutionaries tears down an old order completely, the next generation of organizers gives the new order real structure, a third generation of builders focuses purely on stability and steady growth, and finally a fourth generation of skeptics starts questioning everything that came before them, quietly setting up the next full cycle to begin all over again. You are somewhere inside that will right now, shaped by forces you never consciously chose and rarely stop to notice at all. The way out isn't rejecting your own generation wholesale. It's getting genuinely curious about the specific blind spots baked into it from birth, deliberately seeking out people much older and much younger than you, because the single most useful perspective you'll ever encounter is usually the one that makes you a little bit uncomfortable at first. Some of your best ideas going forward will come from a conversation with someone 40 years younger or 40 years older than you, precisely because they're standing outside the water you've been swimming in your entire life. And Law 18, the very last one, is the law of death denial. We live most days as if we've been guaranteed endless time, filling our hours with distraction specifically so we never have to sit with the one fact about life that's actually certain. The writer Flannery O'Connor was diagnosed with a severe, incurable illness in her 20s, at the exact moment her career was finally beginning to take off after years of struggle, and instead of collapsing into despair the way you might expect, she went on to write some of the most unflinching, clear-eyed fiction of the entire century, fully aware the whole time of how few years she actually had left. That clarity wasn't a curse she simply endured. Greene argues, convincingly, that it's the closest thing to a genuine superpower most of us will ever get the chance to touch. When you actually let mortality in, rather than shoving it away, the petty comparisons stop mattering nearly as much, the fear of what strangers think of you shrinks down to almost nothing, and you finally start living in the present tense instead of some imagined future where you'll get around to it eventually. This was never about being morbid or gloomy. It's about remembering that time is the one resource on earth you cannot negotiate for more of, no matter how much you might want to. So the real question worth sitting with isn't what if I fail. It's what if I never even try in the first place. Seeing your own mortality clearly doesn't just clarify what matters to you, it tends to soften how you see everyone else too, because underneath every argument, every status game, every petty grudge, is another person running out the exact same limited clock you are. 18 laws, and one thread running quietly through every single one of them. The people who move through life with the most clarity were never the ones without flaws, blind spots, or a shadow side of their own. They're simply the ones who stopped denying they had one, and started paying close attention instead. That's the entire game, really. Not becoming a completely different person. Just finally, honestly seeing the one you already are. Here's the part most people miss on a first read of Greene's work. These 18 laws were never really about decoding other people, even though that's the part that gets all the attention. They're about decoding yourself first. Every manipulator you learn to spot, every narcissist you learn to sidestep, every fickle crowd you learn not to chase, all of it starts by turning the lens inward before you ever point it outward. The version of you that reacts without thinking, that gets defensive at the first hint of criticism, that quietly sabotages the very things it claims to want, that version doesn't go away just because you now have a name for it. But naming it is where the real leverage begins. If this changed how you think about the people in your life, or how you think about yourself, do 3 quick things for me. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdown. Drop a like right now, it costs you nothing and it tells the algorithm to put this in front of more people who genuinely need it. And if you want to actually apply these 18 laws instead of just nodding along and forgetting them by tomorrow, grab the free blueprint link below. It turns everything we just covered into a simple daily practice you can start using today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.